I had done the meditation and the visualization, but I did not expect this. 60 people sitting in front of you in one room is daunting, but I feel so grateful for you all to be here because I love every single one of you, and I'm really grateful for you being part of the journey. I have prepared a speech. I was planning to memorize it. It's a bit long. I will try and be concise, but I think it's important that I explain to you guys a little bit about why we're here today and the story before we move on to our amazing panel and the conversation we're going to have today. So, I think you all know my name is Mahika. I am the founder of Empower Sounds Media, which is a crazy thing to say out loud. And although today marks the official launch of the company, the idea for this came about in 2021 when I was 18 and I came to uni, literally right around the corner at John Dodson in first year. And I started going to a lot of entrepreneurship events because this was a space that I was really interested in. And I know, if you know me, you've heard me say that only 2% of VC funding goes to women, and more men named David receive funding for their businesses than all women combined. So all the women in this room, there's no Davids here, and there's we're changing that slowly. As I delve deeper more into this problem, I realized that whatever I do for work, I want to be someone who contributes to the solution for this. And along the way, I met so many incredible founders, like the amazing women here today. And yes. And hearing their stories made me realize that we need to share that, because the power of a story that resonates with you is that you listen to it and you feel like you can do something. So I wanted to recreate that magic, and I have been so lucky to hear some incredibly powerful stories in my life, stories that have given me energy, have given me passion, have given me motivation and the appetite to take risks. And that's why I wanted to recreate that magic, and I started my podcast, Empower Sounds. New decade, new project. I launched it on my 20th birthday, surrounded by many of you in this room, actually. So thank you for being part of that with me. And since it's launched 1.5 years ago, we've grown to 62 countries worldwide, which is a crazy thing to say out loud as well. I'm so incredibly grateful to every single person who has shared their story, including these lovely ladies here today. And actually, season 3 launched today with Kaitlin, and we talked all about entrepreneurship, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. So please, I'm counting on all of you to subscribe, like, comment, you know the drill. It's at Empower Sounds, it's on YouTube, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple, you know the drill. When I was trying to decide what to do to take this further, I reflected on a lot of the off-camera conversations I've had with many of the podcast guests, and a lot of them said that they wanted their own show, or they wanted their own podcast, or they wanted to capture their story in a way that wasn't just speaking to other people on their platforms. And that's what gave me the idea for Empower Sounds Media. So my goal with this company is to collaborate with amazing women and social enterprises and charities, and really just make sure that their voices get heard. So the average British person listens to 7 hours of podcasts a week. But who are we listening to? Who are we giving funding to? Who are we giving airtime to? I think it's our responsibility as listeners, as creators, to be active in changing that narrative. So that's what we're doing here today. And what a better time to celebrate this than on the eve of International Women's Day. And that's why we're here. So today's event marks not just the beginning of this journey, but also a celebration of every woman who has dreamed of making her voice heard. And if you're interested in learning more about the company, come chat to me afterwards. I'm sorry I haven't said hi to anyone here properly because I've been running around like a crazy woman, but grab me and we'll chat and I'll tell you all about it. And our website is live as well, designed by the brilliant Natalia over here. So thank you so much. And yeah, come chat to me after the panel. And before we start the panel, I just want to say thank you. A few special thank yous to my family who are here with us today. Thank you for holding my hand as I hit the publish button on every single season of the podcast. When I registered the company, thank you for physically holding my hand when I did it. Thank you to all my friends who are here. I love every single one of you. You've heard me talk about this for years. So thank you for being here. And thank you to every single person who has listened to the podcast or to me. And this is not just my day, this is our day. So thank you. one of the main points for me to bring all of you guys into one room is that I think community is the center of everything, and every single person here has inspired me to be here today, and I genuinely couldn't have done it without you. And I think that accountability comes in when you have conversations like that inspiration comes in when you don't know how to do something. Like, there's 20 million things I couldn't do today, like attach the mic to the back of these these things that someone supported me with. So thank you, and thank you again to everyone. And my first question for you guys is, because we're here to talk about stories and storytelling, if you had to give a trailer to your life in 3 words, or your career journey in 3 words, or like a sentence, or as Kaitlin likes to say, the elevator pitch, what would you say?
Who wants to start?
3 words. Oh gosh. Elevator pitch. Are we doing 3? I feel like 3 words is more interesting. Like that might be able to peel us back something. So I think in 3 words, my journey was very much unexpected, serendipitous, and this is a preposition, but full of gratitude. So those would be my 3, which I'm happy we can talk about in a bit.
Okay, well, my 3, the first one is kaleidoscope, and the second one is surprising, the way it's moved, and the third one is exciting, always exciting.
Great words. I want 4 words, which would be like jack of all trades, but I can't have those. So I'd probably go with multifaceted, if that's even if I've pronounced it correctly, just because you'll probably hear through my story that I've worn several different roles. I'd probably also say impactful and a joy.
That's awesome. And linking to this question, so when you Google someone, the recommended search options come up. So what would you hope that people would see when they see your name? And based on everything that you've done with your career, you've given your words for yourself, but what would you want other people to receive from the work that you're doing?
I'd probably go with community. So I started the Women in Business Society at my old university, Aston University, 11 years ago. So I think it would be something around community, and then also trying to sort of create that eco space with early stage founders as well.
I think I want them to find the fact that I was always there to support other women.
I think for me, hopefully it's a legacy of impact, whether it's through teaching or working or mentoring. I want to leave a legacy just beyond the 9 to 5.
Awesome. Okay, now we've done kind of more general introductions. I'm going to ask you more specific questions to each person. So Sharena mentioned that she has a podcast, and I think it's amazing. It's called Startup Start Now, to anyone who doesn't know it. And Sharena, you've interviewed amazing top entrepreneurs. You've interviewed Stephen Bartlett, Ben Francis, so many big names. From the conversations you've had, what separates a great storyteller from an average one?
So I guess the first thing is, being a founder, everyone's been on a journey themselves and they are their own brand. So I think what's made them really unique is actually the journey that they've been on and taking other people on that journey with them. Nobody just wakes up and decides to become an entrepreneur. They've gone through lots of knockbacks. Maybe there's jobs that they haven't liked. Maybe there was redundancies along the way. Maybe, especially with female founders, they are actually tackling things that they've gone through and creating businesses to solve those problems, and that's why they have the most impactful businesses. So I would say there's not just one element of it, but they are the brand. They want to keep sharing their story, and they take their audience on that journey with them. And also, being a founder, you have to be your own advocate. You have to be able to share, and nowadays we're seeing a lot more kind of influencer founders on the rise, and people are buying into their companies because they know the person that sits behind that brand. So storytelling is about taking your audience, your community on that journey with them.
That's really interesting. And if you could pass the mic to Kaitlin, who also has a podcast, and it's called Everyday Entrepreneurship for anyone who's interested. And Kaitlin, your style of podcast is a bit different to Sharena's, because you mostly do solo episodes and you talk more about takeaways for people that they can learn. And I feel like each episode is more either a personal story on your journey or a masterclass on a specific element of entrepreneurship. So what's your take on storytelling and how you can communicate in an effective way to reach the people that you want to reach?
Yeah, so I think throughout my journey, and for context, I've had the joy of teaching you at UCL. I've had a lot of really genuine conversations where founders and individuals, or maybe future founders, have questions. And, you can only Google YouTube so much. So for me, it's really about disseminating information in a really understandable, educational, and fun way. And I'm a firm believer, if someone can learn from my mistake, which I have a trophy closet full of failures, which I can talk about, then I'm doing something to expedite someone else's journey. And I think, especially with being a foreign female founder and supporting female founders, education is empowering. So if I can do my part outside of the classroom, that's what my podcast is for.
That's awesome. And that links kind of to my next question. So you both have podcasts, but I think out of, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but there's the three of us in this room have podcasts, and then that's not the case for everyone else. But I think we all need to know how to tell our story. And LinkedIn is quite an awkward place on the internet. It's quite an awkward corner. Most people don't know how to use it. I've seen some people use it like a CV. I've seen some people use it like a diary. I've seen some hybrids. What is everyone's take? I'm really interested because you all have different approaches in terms of the way that you post. How can every single person in this room, what's your one tip on effectively communicating points in their journey and their story? I was like, you should start.
Okay. Well, I think the art of storytelling is actually to respond to the good questions. So, you ask very good questions on your podcast, and I'm sure you do as well. I don't have a podcast, but I've been interviewed from a few, and there's a huge difference between somebody who's skillful at asking those questions and somebody who isn't. Going to LinkedIn, I see LinkedIn as much more a business marketplace. So it's about making connections, telling good stories about what you're doing and attracting like-minded people to it. I don't think it's a personal platform in any way, and there are some people who use it personally. There's other platforms for that. But LinkedIn is really good for building your network. And when I come to my top tips or whatever it is, build your network, and you've all got a ready-made one in this room. So that's, I think LinkedIn is very, very good for that.
And if someone was to post, do you have any advice on how they can create something that people actually want to be part of and actually want to read?
Images, sound bites, tantalizing questions, just something to hook people in, not just I did this yesterday and there were lots of people there, but something that will hook people in and attract them. That would be my advice.
I've got a couple of things to add to that, actually. So I guess figuring out, on a higher level, what's your personal brand? What is the message that you want to put out to your audience and the people you connect with? And finding a couple of topics that work for that, not feeling that you need to have every single answer to every single thing that's going through the news and have an opinion on it, because you're going to lose people. People aren't going to remember what you stand for. But if you had a couple of topics that are close to your heart that you really want to say, I'm going to sit in this space and I'm going to own this space on startups or fashion or, podcasts or whatever your thing is, and then keep showing up for that topic. And it's not about necessarily saturating it either, because you lose your audience. It's about when you put posts out, make them impactful, make less is more sometimes, actually, because you can switch people off by just being annoying. So
I'll add to that. So I agree with both of you. I think it's a platform, especially for founders and early stage founders, for some thought leadership. And one thing I advocate for is that people will meet people before they meet your product or your business. So you are the face, and that is something, like you said, those verticals you should be able to own and be the thought leader in those spaces, whether it's oncology or podcasting. So one thing is you can create almost like a founder-generated demand for you and your business and all the potential it has by showing up and by having that personal brand and being authentic in a way that makes sense for you and hopefully your future venture.
Amazing. And my next question is actually for Jill, but if anyone has any additional comments, please let me know. So we've talked about storytelling on LinkedIn, but what about offline? What about in the meeting room or in the boardroom? I think, again, the reason we're here is because there is an inequality, and you have to know how to effectively communicate your points, especially as a woman. And so do you have any advice on how to do that and how to get your message across effectively?
Well, it's all, the secret of it all is in the planning and preparation. So for whatever meeting you're going into, you need to be absolutely clear.
Oh, sorry. You need to be absolutely clear. What are the points you want to get over? And find a way of doing it that you might make the same point 3 or 4 times, but you do it in a different way. So you're getting your message across, but you're not being boring, you're not being repetitive.
Awesome. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess it just goes back to that storytelling part as well. So taking people on a journey, maybe that the topic's new to them, and just a bit of education on how to go about that.
Awesome.
No, I think the only thing I would potentially add is even before you get in the boardroom, going in with that confident mindset that your story is worth sharing and that you add value to this conversation, because I feel like half the time there's that prep before you are in that high stakes situation.
And never forget that you know more about your story than they do. So you are the owner of that information. You can be confident because you know your story. They've just got to absorb it and take things out of it.
That's really powerful. And before everyone came into the room, Jill and I were talking because Jill had the launch event for the Gender Index yesterday, and I was very grateful that I got to be a part of that and be invited. And I confidently went and sat in the front row next to Jill. And all the speakers started speaking, and these were incredible people from different walks of life. And one of the speakers was talking about imposter syndrome, and I was like, yeah, like, what am I doing in the front row? Like, I probably shouldn't have done that. And then I was like, no, I was invited, I belong here. And when I interviewed Jill, I asked her about imposter syndrome. She was like, never use that word again. We don't talk about imposter syndrome here because we don't have time. And
It's a complete waste of time.
it is a waste of time. And so I'm curious to Kaitlin and Sharena. Jill thinks that imposter syndrome is a waste of time, and I'm learning to agree. It's a difficult thing to integrate and learn. But what is your take on imposter syndrome, and what's your experience with that?
Yeah, so I'm going to use that now, that it's a complete waste of time. I understand, especially in entrepreneurship, where there's no rubric. So that, like, I feel like self-doubt creeps in because for your entire life, you're told X, Y, and Z, and now you're embarking into the unknown. So I understand that self-doubt can exist, but being able to transform those limiting beliefs. And I think one thing that's a very practical thing is, acknowledging and recording your accomplishments, no matter how big or how small. I call it creating a brag folder, so that if you are having these moments, you can go back and say, no, I was written up in the Telegraph or here or there. Because sometimes facts speak louder than those limiting beliefs. And if you are equipped with those facts, let's just cut to the good stuff.
That's great.
No, I love that. I'm going to be slightly controversial. That I still get nervous every time I've got a new entrepreneur to interview on the podcast. And the things that do make me feel comfortable is, yes, I have, interviewed Ben Francis, Stephen Bartlett, founder of Hotel Chocolat, the list goes on. And I've been very lucky to have those kind of one-to-one conversations. But I do get nervous. I get nervous every single time I've got a talk to do. I've been to some amazing places like Buckingham Palace and, places that I dreamt as a young child to go to. But that nerves, that kind of like, am I the right person, does kick in from time to time. But it's quickly followed up with a bit of a, and I can sort of teach you some methods. I go, well, you've done bigger things than this, Sharena, before, so you're going to be absolutely fine. And this is my dialogue literally before I'm like sat here. And I do that every single time. And I know, like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, literally. And I think just kind of firstly acknowledging, like, nerves is what brought me to here today. This is like exciting. I'm so glad that I get to feel nervous about doing something I'm excited about, because I've got so many friends, so many people in my community that are just like so comfortable with being here. I absolutely love every time I'm being made to feel uncomfortable. I should be nervous that I'm speaking to a multi-billionaire. So I think whatever word we're going to use about it, I've been calling it imposter syndrome. Those nerves are okay. Acknowledge them. Give yourself a quick little pep talk. Dust yourself off. If you need a cry, have a cry. Call a friend. Eat your favourite foods and then just get on with it. And what's the worst that could happen?
That's
I've got loads to add to this.
please.
I mean, I'm very much older than all of you in this room, but I still get nervous. And you need that to give you the adrenaline. Yeah. But I do have a technique to be nervous 48 hours before the event. So yesterday was big. And so I did the nervous bit 48 hours before and sort of visioned into the situation, worked through it. Yeah. And that, but what
were you saying to yourself?
Saying, well, I've done much worse things than this, a bit like you, yeah? What's the worst that can happen? And a bit that I know more about this than anybody else does, so I should be confident about it. But you need those bit of nerves to get your adrenaline up.
100%.
So I prefer to say a bit of nerves rather than the other phrase. But do you want me to tell a story?
I would love for you to tell a story.
So when I went for my very first interview in the House of Commons, I worked there for about 20 years and all, but when I went for my very first interview, first job, and it was a long round of interviews, I don't know how many hundred people applied, but a lot did. And I was being interviewed for something called the head office keeper, which is actually a facilities manager. And I don't know if you've been to the House of Commons, but there's a big place called Central Lobby, and it's where they do the newscast broadcast from, and it is huge. And I was in there on Friday morning at 9 o'clock all on my own, and it's cavernous, and there I was sitting on a green leather bench thinking, what am I doing here? Exactly, little old me here in this place, it's so important. What am I doing here? And then after a couple of minutes I thought, well, the people who are running this recruitment campaign must believe I can do this job. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got to the final interview. And so I should believe I can do this job. And I went into the interview as if I'd got the job already. Wow. And, that's when imposter syndrome began to float out the door. And I think that applies to anything. So if you're given a promotion or a project and you think, oh, God, I can't do this, just have some respect for the people who've given it to you, because it's their judgment that has made the decision to give it to you. So just think of it like that. Have some respect for the people who've given you this honour. And the other little snippet is that I do quite a lot of coaching. And if I'm in a room with, 6 or 8 people and they want to dissect imposter syndrome, the first thing I do is say to them, OK, I want you to write down how many imposters there are in this room. Leave it at that.
That's a mic drop moment.
Wow, that's so powerful. And before I move on to the next question, it reminds me, and I want to add a little story as well. So basically, for context, I met Kaitlin at a program that I did at UCL, and it was about exploring your entrepreneurial idea, and Kaitlin led the sessions, and that's how this company was born. And at the end of the program, there was a competition, and only a few people from the cohort were able to pitch. And there's so many talented people in that room. Some of the people are in this room tonight, so thank you for being here. And I was sitting there and I was like, there's no way I'm gonna get this. There's no way I'm gonna get this opportunity. There's so many people who are way more talented than me. And I heard that thought, and in hearing that thought, I was like, whoa, like, I have a friend here who said that when you can see or hear your thoughts, it means that they're not yours, because you can observe them, right? And so I took that as a reflection, and I wrote all the thoughts down that I had of, I can't do this, this company's not a good idea, there's people who are way more qualified, talented than me. And then on the same page, I went and wrote the opposite thought. And I wrote, no, I am talented. No, I do deserve to be here. No, this is a good idea. No, people do believe in me. And through that, I ended up practicing, and I ended up not only getting into that competition, but winning and getting a check, and then ending up being able to pay for this venue and this event and get you all in this room. And so it's not just that we don't have time for imposter syndrome, but like, it's kind of an illusion as well. And you get to decide who you are at the end of the day. I think you start with whatever experiences are imposed onto you from childhood, from school, from whatever. But then at a certain point, you have to like take note of that and then realize, like, is this something I actually want to believe about myself? So yeah, that's
I
my
think self-belief is absolutely the key.
100%. Hey, Jill, actually, again, for you. So being the first ever woman in your role, how did you, we've talked about imposter syndrome, but how did you carve like that out? And not just in terms of dealing with your own internal discomfort of do I belong here, but also navigating the other interpersonal relationships with colleagues, with other people, like how, I don't want to say assert yourself, but like how did you assert yourself?
It was about establishing, yes, yourself. And I had worked there for quite a long time, so I knew quite a lot of members of parliament and they knew me. And I think the big difference between me and the 600 years of ex-military men was a very different approach. So their approach was very much yes or no policing, and that was it, and which of course encouraged the members and their staff just to find a way around it to get what they wanted. Whereas my approach was very different, which was facilitating. So I would talk to them about what was it they wanted to achieve and how could we work together to achieve it without upsetting the speaker, breaking the rules, or from my aspect, compromising security, because part of the job was the security. And, you know, that approach appealed to the members who were coming in from business rather than career politicians, and they were in the majority. So that was sort of my way of, you know, the way I had worked before I became sergeant, that obviously I did a lot more of when I was sergeant. And I had a lot of support from my female peers and the female members of parliament, huge support, although I think now it's 40%, but it was much less then. And it sort of became a sisterhood, that, you know, you were doing it for those women as much as establishing yourself. And if I could do it, I wanted them to see that they could do it.
100%.
So there was quite a lot of that in it.
If you could pass the mic to Sharena, because Sharena works in property, and that's also a very male-dominated space. And when we had our chat, both on camera and off, you've talked about how there's been times where you've dealt with contractors who've just assumed that you don't know what you're talking about, or you're the boss's daughter or
Happened
wife.
last week.
Tell us about your experience and how you've navigated that and being a founder in that very male-dominated space.
So I will probably set the scene of how I even got into property. So I grew up with a single father back in Exeter. My father made us do on weekends, summer holidays, DIY. I thought by the time I'd gone to university, everyone knew how to lay carpets, tile, you know, fix a roof leak. I just thought these were normal things. Silly me. I got to the bank. I joined Royal Bank of Scotland, working in the first rotation of real estate finance. We were deploying multi-million pounds out to big skyscrapers in London. And I would sit on a board in a very male, white-dominated sort of industry, and they didn't know how, like, a rewire of a house would work. And at that point, I was just like, this is really interesting. Obviously, there was kind of some connotations around that. And anyway, fast forward a few years, I decided I wanted to start my own business. And I was thinking, what do I know best? I actually started working at an estate agency from the age of 17. And I moved back to Devon. I tried and failed at a number of different things, but what I stuck with was converting family homes into shared housing. I had known for 7 years prior to that what it felt like to be a tenant, and I wanted to create homes in Devon, and especially in the city centre, that young professionals could live in, and yeah, the kind of things that I would feel comfortable living in. So providing that service, that came along with, very long way of saying, now playing in kind of a very male-dominated area. And yeah, there's times and times, you know, property is highly regulated with gas safety tests, electrical tests, and everything in between that goes wrong. And from time to time, you've got to contact someone, and the amount of times that people have thought that there must be a male business owner, maybe it's my father's business. I get asked that all the time. I get asked, you know, I love it when someone tries to explain the problem and I already know what the answer is, but I sit there and I'm like, right, so why would it cost this like extra 2,000? And I love playing the game with them as well. I find it highly amusing. And by them, you know, even acting like that, they've just like lost a contract for themselves. So, you kind of get used to it. You kind of get used to operating in that area. And then the really good ones, you know, that we build long-term relationships and they continue to be great contractors. So I wish I could sit here and say, yeah, I feel like it's just part and parcel of the territory, but it shouldn't be, right? And that's the point.
And do you have any advice, not just for the women? Okay, there's not that many guys in the room, but there are, you know, and I'm really grateful for that. And do you have any advice for the men in the room of how they can be good allies and make sure that they don't have any inherent bias when they're talking to a woman or interviewing a woman or when they have female colleagues? How can they approach that situation?
So first of all, let's give the men in the room a clap for coming tonight. So everything we're trying to achieve sat here today can absolutely not be done without them. My greatest role models and mentors are male figures. And actually what they can, I believe they're doing and should continue to do, is applaud our work, recognize what we do, show up, coming, you know, cheer us on, refer us on to other people, like our posts, whatever, if it's in the content creating space, but just continue to support. Call out bad behavior. If you hear something, you might not be part of that conversation, but we don't always need to feel like we need to set people straight. Do that on our behalves. You have sisters, you've got mothers, you've got aunties, like, we could just live, I sound very, you know, but we could just live in such a happier world if everyone just came together.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And if you could pass the mic to Kaitlin, as a coach and as a teacher who's taught like girls, guys, everyone, have you noticed any differences? Like, again, you taught us a program in confidence between that, and do you have any advice on like being a young female founder as well, and how to show up with authority and confidence?
Yeah, so having been a female founder and supporting a lot of female founders, not only in the UK but globally, I feel like one thing I see, and I would hate to see this, so we need to stop doing this, is underselling ourselves. I feel like we have to work twice as hard to get half of the acknowledgement, but I also feel like we ourselves are not shouting or sharing all of the amazing things we're doing. So one of the biggest things I work with female founders is, you know, there's a lot of things maybe we're not sharing, and it's not about being bragging, it's acknowledging credit where credit is due. And that will elevate your business, that will elevate your brand, that will elevate you as a founder for countless other opportunities. So I think that is an area where female founders, we need to continue to improve. And I think in the female founder space, empowering and shouting and encouraging each other, gone hopefully are the days of being hyper competitive. We are collaborative. We are all moving each other in different spaces, and anything we can do to amplify each other's messages, then we are doing the ecosystem good. So those would be my kind of 2 points.
That's amazing. And since you're talking about shouting out women, who is one of your role models or inspirations?
Oh, gosh. So I think this is, I guess, a personal one. I would have to say my mom. And that's not exactly like a cop-out answer because everybody loves their mom. But she was someone who, throughout her life, I'm one of 4 kids. So like, first off, it was a madhouse. But she was always persistent in what she did. It took her, I think, 8 years to finish college, but she did it. She went back to school in her 40s for a teaching degree. And I think seeing that persistence and determination and drive, no matter the scenarios, that is something I really take into my work. And a lot of work she did, I mean, being, you know, an educator or a reading assistant, they're not glamorous McKinsey jobs, but the impact and legacy she had, so it's been 10 years since she passed, but the impact and legacy she had in her journey and seeing the amount of people in her life she touched, that's the kind of legacy I want to leave. I don't think it's always on your gravestone. No one's going to write your job title and how much money you made, but you will remember all the lives you've touched. And I think that's kind of the inspiration I want to take moving forward.
That's beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
What about you, Jill? Who's your role model?
Well, yeah, my mother and my grandmother were. The interesting part about that is that my grandfather was a children's magician. Yeah, and so, you know, there is magic. It's not cutting people in half, but there is magic around us. And my grandmother ran the business.
Wow.
And he worked for Harrods and entertained Prince Charles and Princess Anne when they were little. And, you know, so that was inspirational enough as well. And my mother just did so many things. But I'm just going to talk about different kind of role models. And one was Betty Boothroyd, who was the first female speaker in the House of Commons and, you know, fought hard to get where she was. And she was absolute backbone of steel when she was working. And when I first went there, she took me on a tour of speakers' apartments. And on the way around, she said to me, I hope you feel as I do, that you've got this post because you're the right person for the job and not only because you're a woman. And that has stayed with me. Yeah. And the other person who I admire hugely is Michelle Obama. I think she had a really difficult role. And she's got this great phrase, it comes from her book, which I do recommend you to read if you haven't read it, is when they go low, you go high. And that's just such good advice. You know, you can get dragged down by people in situations, but just raise your game above it. And I think that's huge advice. So there's just some of the people that have inspired me.
Thank you.
So I echo all of these amazing women. Definitely Michelle Obama. I would also say Alison Rose. So she was the first female who was to head up a high street bank. I was really fortunate enough to work with her as well. She wrote a paper which was pretty much one of the first to really look at statistics of how poor the numbers, the quality and the investments that were being put into female entrepreneurship. So I think kind of her work, I know of late, things didn't leave on the right accord and all sorts. But despite that, actually being able to work with her quite closely. As a grad, I went up to do a Women in Business event in Scotland. And right at the end of the event, I grabbed her and I said, would you come and speak to the grads? We would really love to hear you. And she honoured that just as I was ambushing her to get a taxi. And she came and allowed me to interview her and, you know, share her story of how she'd worked from a grad all the way up to CEO. So I think she's been, a massive role model as well as, you know, just kind of other female entrepreneurs that I've had on the podcast. All their stories are just so inspiring.
That's awesome. And you speak of ambush, which I find really funny because I've ambushed all three of you over the years, saying thank you for being here and speaking. I really love your story. Please speak to me on my podcast. And like that mentorship has turned into friendship. And actually, before I move on to my last question, before we move on to Q&A, I want to share my role model who actually just walked into the room. That's Dr. Mitchell over there. Please stand up. So I have many role models, my mum as well, incredible. But Dr. Mitchell, let me tell you the story. So I grew up in Cambridge, which is, the university is diverse, the town not so much. And Dr. Mitchell gave a talk when I was in high school about the US-Mexico border. And for anyone who doesn't know, I studied geography. And I knew that I was going to study geography at university. So I went to the talk to learn more about migration. And she spoke more about women and their experiences on the border. And as a woman, as a migrant, that really touched me, that your safety is a privilege. It's not a right. And it should be a right, but it's not. And that changed something for me. And I decided that whatever I do in the future, I want to do something that helps this. And Dr. Mitchell's experience was in Mexico. So I was like, okay, I don't speak Spanish. Let's change that. So I naively went on Duolingo and all the platforms. And this was just as the pandemic was starting. So I decided to do the whole learn a language during the pandemic. And again, living in Cambridge doesn't get you very far. I didn't have really anyone to practice with. And so I emailed her and I said, hi, I know you don't know who I am and you've never taught me, but you spoke. And after your talk, I decided to teach myself Spanish. I'm failing miserably. Please practice with me. And I went into her office and spoke the worst Spanish that one could. And she said, I like you. I want to adopt you as my protege. And then the next entirety of the year, every Monday lunchtime, we would just go into her classroom and we would talk. And through that, I learned Spanish, but I also learned so much about life and how to just accept yourself and be bold and just do things for yourself first. And so you mentioned your mum, who is a teacher, and I've had the privilege of having a very, very good teacher in my life. And because of that moment, I've been able to live in Spain. I'm now a fluent Spanish speaker, by the way. And it changed my life in many ways. So thank you. Okay, my last question before we move on to Q&A, because I feel greedy, stealing all the time, asking you my questions. You've all been interviewed on my podcast, so you know that I like to end on the theme of gratitude. So my last question for you guys is, what are you most grateful for today?
I'm most grateful for just sitting here with you wonderful women. I've also learned so much from your conversation. I'm so proud of you that you said you were going to make this happen and you made it happen. So I'm just sitting here, just happy to, on such a auspicious occasion, sharing this moment.
I think I'm most grateful for this kaleidoscope career that I've had, and it really has been, and you know what a kaleidoscope is and how it all comes together. And I feel it's come together now, so I can help people like Mahika and many others. I've had some great mentors, men like you, and I mentor some young men now. And, it's bringing this, all this career that's come together to bring me to be able to do all these wonderful things now.
These are hard acts to follow. So I think one thing I'm really grateful for is, I heard this analogy once and I love it, where you can either be the light, be the mirror, or in some cases be the disco ball. And I think this is a very disco ball moment where there's a lot of people who can shine on each other. And I hope, I'm very grateful to be here today and continue. I think we learn from each other. And that's what I'm grateful for.
Oh, lovely.
I like the disco ball.
I'm so grateful to every one of you. Thank you so much for making time, and thank you for guiding me on this journey. I would not be in this room without you. So now we move on to audience Q&A. Anyone who has any questions, please ask.
Brave first.
No questions? Really? Okay. Tanya, go for it.
Firstly, thank you so much for...
Oh, wait, 1 second. 1 second.
Oh,
I know it's a fake microphone, but...
Oh, sure. Okay, what's one pivotal... Could you explain one time throughout your career that's been very pivotal in your journey, and what do you think has... How did that come across, and what have you learned from it? For every one of you, like the pivotal moment. Could you share something?
Oh, I don't want to start. You start.
I do think about this sometimes, and it isn't a great, huge, major thing, but it was... My husband came home with a Daily Telegraph with an advertisement in it and said, there's a job here that I think would be good for you. And I said, don't be so ridiculous, I couldn't do that. And he said, no, go on, they're asking for all the things you're good at and all the things you like doing. So I'm okay. I read on, and that was that first job in the House of Commons I referred to. So that was a pivotal moment.
Amazing. I think mine's got to be leaving my stable finance job in London, which on the face of it to everybody looked perfect, but to myself I just knew there was something like tapping me on the shoulder saying, you need to go and try it, you need to go and try it, you need to go and try it, and actually following through with that. The day I handed in my notice, I went back and spoke to some of my colleagues at the bank who on a Wednesday, Thursday night, it was very typical to go out to have a drink with each other, and they would be the ones sharing with me that if they weren't there, that they would have started their own business and all their dreams. That day I handed in my notice and I spoke to someone I respected quite a bit. He said to me, you shouldn't leave the bank because people like you don't get these opportunities. So, and I think about it often, and I actually am so glad that, again, I listened to my intuition, and that's the thing that's kept guiding me forward. So, yeah, I would say that was pivotal.
Oh, okay, we got a second mic. So I know there's a lot of students in the room, so I will set the stage. It was a snowy day in February, which London does not get snow. I was a UCL student who signed up for a University of London-wide hackathon, housed at King's, didn't know there was a rivalry, so awkward. Show up not knowing a single soul. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to try this out for a weekend. And during that weekend, I workshopped an idea And I met my co-founder, who was from Kings, a Ukrainian I've never met before. And that opened up the doors to betting on myself. This was back in a different government where we didn't have 2 years after graduation. I had a visa that was expiring. I had a semblance of a business idea, and just having that moment and being like, okay, I'm just going to go for it and try it, that opened up so much possibilities. So yeah, so I think just betting on yourself, taking the risks, because if you don't have your back, who does? That kind of moment.
Okay, we're going to do this side of the room first. I'll come back.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, first of all, that I have had goosebumps at several times during this talk, and I feel so empowered right now. Well done for bringing it all together. I wanted to ask how you ask for help, because at times I know there are people around me who can help me get where I want to be, but I don't feel like I can ask for the help. So what's your advice?
People love being asked for help because you're flattering them. That's really... Oh, sorry, yeah. People love being asked for help. Well, I do, and I'm sure this is true, because you're flattering them by asking them to share their wisdom with you. So just do it. Just do it. You've heard JFDI. Just do it.
Absolutely would echo that. Also, people always say, how do you manage to reach that level of entrepreneur to get on the podcast? And it's by, they're all the successful ones you see. You don't see the list of rejected people or people that have never wrote back. And that's not important, right? Because the ones that show up believe in it, and that's all that's important. So yes, just keep asking. And as well, even when, so I'll give you a slight story about Ben Francis. I really wanted to get him on the podcast. I DM'd him so much on Instagram, emails, whatever. And as soon as I got to Cambridge, I did my master's in entrepreneurship, and I got elected to be part of something called the Cambridge Union. I shoot my shot again, and I asked, and it got there. And yeah, so I think you may never hear back from them, but find the opportunity, make that opportunity for them, remember them, and then it's all full circle. So yeah, now I can text him anytime and he'll do anything.
Amazing. I think one thing as well, I think asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. Any founder I know, and they're like, hey, I don't know this. For example, when I started, I did not have a business background. I thought Tam, Sam, and Sam were people's names. Like, I Googled them afterwards. But every step of the way, I was the one raising my hand, asking for help. And that is a sign of self-awareness, and you know what you don't know. And like everyone knows, like, people are a lot nicer than we give them credit for. So yeah, you'll hear a lot of no's, but you also probably will hear a few yeses, because it is flattering.
Yeah. And also, I did mention earlier about the network. You know, build your network around the people who are better at something than you are, and then they're there for you. And they always say you should employ people who are better than you, because you'll learn so much from them.
This is true, and your challenge, and everyone's challenge, is afterwards we're going to break shortly. Like, there's going to be food, there's going to be drinks. Go speak to someone you don't know. You never know. Help is, like, not the right word, but, like, every new conversation you have with someone is a gift. And, like, I hope that each one of you, like, gets a gift by speaking to someone cool in this room, because I was saying to my family, I think there's a cool person in this room for every single one of you. So, yeah. Amazing. I'm going to wrap up here because I feel mean keeping you from the food and the drinks. But genuinely, thank you so much for being here. It means so much to me. And I'm going to give every single one of you a hug before you leave. So please come say hi, bye, chat to me. And before we all leave the room, please go check out the website. Natalia and I worked really hard on it. And please go subscribe, comment on the YouTube channel of the podcast, because Kaitlin and I speak all about entrepreneurship and her journey a little bit more. So you'll learn more about that. But thank you. Thank you.